Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lingo Dots Podcasts. Today, we're taking a look at the early years of a historical figure with a complicated and dark legacy, Adolf Hitler. His story is not easy, but understanding his early life helps us see the influences that shaped him.
Adolf was born on April 20th, 1889, in a small town in Austria. He came from a unique family background with a strict father and a gentle, loving mother. Each of them had a big impact on his personality.
Yes, his father, Alois Hitler, was known to be very serious and strict. Alois had worked hard to improve his own life, moving from a difficult start to reach the middle class. He had high hopes for his children, and he wasn't shy about pushing Adolf to meet those expectations.
On the other hand, Adolf's mother, Clara, was the complete opposite. She was gentle and very protective. She showed Adolf a lot of love and support, and she tried to keep peace in the family, especially between Adolf and his father.
Exactly. And this difference between his parents made Adolf feel quite torn. He feared his father because of Alois's strictness, but he deeply loved his mother, who was always on his side. Clara's love made him feel special, even when he didn't meet his father's expectations. We can see that these early family dynamics, especially between his mother and father, would later play a big role in shaping how Adolf saw himself and others. This is where his story begins, with a family that influenced him deeply.
Now let's take a closer look at Adolf's father, Alois, because his story is pretty complex. Alois didn't have an easy start. His mother, Maria, was a single woman who worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families, and she didn't include the name of his father on his birth record. Later, she married a man named Johann Hiedler, who eventually became Alois's legal father, though it was a bit of a complicated process.
Yes, and there was an interesting twist here. When Alois took on his stepfather's last name, something went wrong in the paperwork. Instead of Hiedler, his last name was mistakenly written as Hitler. It was just a simple error, but it stuck. Hitler was actually a term meaning someone who lived in a hut or small home. Who would have guessed that this name, meant for a humble background, would one day become known worldwide?
It's almost unbelievable, right? That small mistake led to a name that's now one of the most infamous in history. Even though it was just an error, Alois and his family kept the name. It's a reminder that sometimes even tiny details can make a huge impact later on.
Now let's talk about Adolf's school years, because this is where some big family tensions really began. Adolf wasn't a fan of school, to say the least. He found it hard to follow rules, and he wasn't very interested in studying. While most kids his age were getting ready for serious work or planning their futures, Adolf was busy daydreaming. He liked getting attention, but didn't want the discipline that came with learning or working hard.
And this is where the trouble with his father, Alois, really became obvious. Alois wanted Adolf to have a stable career, preferably in the government. He hoped his son would have a serious job with structure and security, unlike the arts, which seemed risky and unrealistic. But Adolf had zero interest in this path. He felt that his father's ideas were boring, and he dreamed of doing something different, something he felt was more exciting and special.
Absolutely. And while Alois was strict and often disappointed in Adolf, his mother Clara was the opposite. She believed her son was unique and gave him constant support no matter what. She even defended him when he didn't meet his father's expectations, saying he just needed time to find his own way. Her encouragement made him feel confident, even proud, and it probably fed into his sense that he was meant for something important. So, at home, Adolf was getting two very different messages, and you can see how that might shape his thinking.
As Adolf continued through his school years, his behavior became even more of a problem. Teachers noticed he was restless and often lazy, and he'd get into trouble frequently. It seemed like he didn't care about rules at all. While other kids were starting to show potential in their studies, Adolf just wasn't interested. His teachers didn't see anything special in him, which made Alois even more frustrated with his son's attitude.
Yes, and on top of this, a very sad event struck the family. When Adolf was 11, his younger brother Edmund became ill and sadly passed away. This loss had a huge impact on him. They say that after Edmund's death, Adolf would often visit his brother's grave, even lying next to it late into the night. Losing Edmund left him feeling deeply sad and very alone, as if a part of him had been taken away.
It really changed him, didn't it? After Edmund's passing, Adolf became a lot quieter and more distant. His classmates noticed he didn't play or laugh as much, and he seemed to keep to himself. His sadness turned into a kind of anger that grew over time. Without his brother, he became even more isolated, with only his mother, Clara, as his source of comfort. She tried her best to help him feel loved, but Edmund's death had left a mark on him that would never fully heal.
Things took another turn when Adolf was 14. In 1903, his father, Alois, passed away unexpectedly. With his father gone, there was no one left to push him toward a serious career path. This was a big shift for Adolf, as he no longer felt pressured to follow his father's strict plans. And Clara, his mother, didn't pressure him at all. Instead, she let him choose his own direction in life.
Yes, and with that freedom, Adolf's attitude started to change even more. Without his father's rules, he began spending more time daydreaming about the future. He felt like he was special and imagined that he was meant for something great. But instead of working or studying, he mostly spent his time alone, thinking about himself and his dreams. Clara continued to support him, and in her eyes, her son could do no wrong. She encouraged him, and Adolf grew more confident, even if he didn't actually make any real plans for his future.
Right. And this confidence didn't come from hard work. It came from his mother's constant belief in him. Adolf started to feel almost entitled to live life on his own terms, without any effort or responsibility. He even began dressing in a way that made him look wealthier than he was, as if he believed he deserved a grand life without working for it. This attitude of his, combined with his lack of direction, would stay with him and shape many of his choices later on. Clara's endless support was meant to help him, but it also fed his belief that he was destined for something important without having to try.
As Adolf grew older, he started telling people that he wanted to be an artist. He dreamed of becoming famous, believing he had a natural talent for painting. By the time he was 17, he decided to apply to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, one of the top art schools. He was confident that he'd be accepted, and that his life as a successful artist would begin right away.
But things didn't go as he expected. When he submitted his artwork, the Academy rejected him, saying his work wasn't good enough. This rejection hit him hard. Adolf was shocked, even humiliated, because he believed he had real talent. He couldn't understand why the Academy didn't see his potential, and he felt deeply frustrated by the failure. Instead of accepting it, he started to blame the Academy, thinking they just couldn't recognize his greatness.
And that reaction, blaming others instead of looking at his own skills, became a pattern for him. He convinced himself that the problem wasn't with his art, but with the people who judged it. This attitude made him angrier and more distant. He began to see himself as misunderstood, as someone who others just didn't appreciate. Rather than improving his art, he let his disappointment turn into bitterness. Sadly, this rejection didn't push him to try harder. Instead, it fed a growing sense of resentment and frustration that he held on to.
While Adolf was dealing with his rejection from the Academy, a new challenge appeared in his life. His mother, Clara, who had always been his strongest supporter, fell seriously ill. She had cancer, and her health began to decline quickly. This was incredibly hard for Adolf because despite his growing frustrations, he depended on her love and encouragement.
Yes, and Clara's illness brought a lot of sadness into his life. She was his main source of comfort, and the only person who believed in him unconditionally. As her health worsened, he became more worried, but he still focused on his own dreams, not realizing how much he would miss her when she was gone. In 1907, Clara passed away, and her death left him feeling lost and deeply saddened.
After her passing, Adolf felt completely alone. Without her support, his confidence began to crumble. He no longer had anyone who truly believed in him, and he struggled to find direction. This feeling of emptiness pushed him to look for a new start, and he decided to move to Munich, Germany. He thought maybe a change of place would bring him a new purpose, but he carried his grief and frustration with him.
When Adolf moved to Munich, he still didn't have much of a plan. He spent his days wandering, feeling lost and uncertain. But in 1914, something happened that would change his life entirely. World War I began. Germany, along with other nations, was preparing for a massive conflict. Like many young men at the time, Adolf felt a strong sense of duty and excitement, and he decided to join the German army.
Yes, and this was the first time he felt truly committed to something. The army provided a strict routine and clear goals, which he had never really experienced before. He found purpose in following orders, working with others, and facing challenges. Even though life in the trenches was tough and dangerous, he showed discipline and took his duties seriously. For his hard work, he was eventually promoted to corporal, and this made him feel proud, like he was finally part of something important.
Exactly. And that sense of purpose meant a lot to him. However, when Germany lost the war in 1918, Adolf felt devastated. He had believed deeply in Germany's victory, and losing filled him with anger and disappointment. This experience would fuel his resentment and make him start looking for reasons and people to blame for the defeat.
After the war ended in 1918, Germany was in a really difficult situation. The economy was falling apart, and many people had lost their jobs. Prices were high, food was hard to get, and soldiers like Adolf returned home with no clear path forward. For him, this was a tough adjustment. He had felt strong and important in the army, but now he was back to feeling lost and without purpose.
And the loss of the war made everything worse for him. He, like many others, couldn't accept that Germany had been defeated. This feeling of betrayal led him to search for answers, and he started listening to groups who felt the same way. These groups were angry, and they believed Germany's problems were caused by certain groups of people, especially the Jewish community. Adolf began to absorb these ideas and blamed Germany's struggles on people he felt were different.
Right, and soon he joined a political group called the German Workers' Party. This group, which would later become the Nazi Party, shared his anger and frustration. They were speaking about the same issues that troubled him: Germany's defeat, the economy, and finding someone to blame. Adolf quickly became involved and used his strong speaking skills to share his views. His words were powerful, and people listened, feeling like he understood their pain and wanted to help.
Yes, and this is where his influence started to grow. He was finding a way to turn his anger into action, and his speeches gave him a new identity. People who felt as he did started to follow him, believing he could help restore Germany's pride. This marked the beginning of his rise in the Nazi Party, where he would gain more power and more followers, each one hoping he could provide the answers they desperately needed.
As Adolf continued speaking at gatherings and meetings, his influence grew quickly. People were drawn to his passionate speeches, especially when he talked about restoring Germany's pride and strength. His speeches promised hope during a dark time. Many Germans felt defeated and hopeless after the war, and Adolf gave them someone to believe in. He was able to make people feel like they were part of something big, something that could bring Germany back to its former power.
And his rise in the Nazi Party really picked up speed. He knew how to tap into people's anger and frustration, offering them simple answers to complex problems. One of his tactics was to create a common enemy. He blamed groups he considered outsiders, particularly the Jewish community, saying they were responsible for Germany's struggles. This gave people a clear target for their anger, even though it was based on lies and prejudice.
Yes, and as more people started supporting him, he gained funds and resources to expand the Nazi Party. He organized rallies and events, gathering larger and larger crowds. Adolf presented himself as the strong leader Germany needed to fix its problems. His words stirred up a dangerous mix of hope and hatred, and many people, desperate for change, believed he could make Germany great again. This belief helped him build a loyal following, allowing him to push his ideas further, bringing him closer to real power.
It's unsettling to think how he used people's fears and hopes to his advantage. Instead of promoting unity and recovery, he created division and targeted innocent groups. His promises of a better future hid the dark plans that were forming. And unfortunately, his growing power would soon change Germany and the world in ways people could never have imagined.
Looking back on Adolf Hitler's early years and rise to power, it's clear how his story can teach us some valuable lessons. His life shows us how easily people can be influenced by promises of hope, especially when times are hard. Many people were drawn in by his confident words and believed he could help them. But instead of lifting others up, he used their trust to spread hate and division.
That's so true. Hitler's story is a powerful reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and prejudice. When leaders play on people's fears and target certain groups, it can lead to devastating outcomes. Studying history like this helps us remember the importance of kindness, understanding, and respect. By learning about these dark moments, we can work toward a future where everyone is valued.
Absolutely. It's a chance to choose peace and unity over fear. Let's hope that remembering these lessons helps us create a better world, one based on respect for all.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through history here at Lingo Dots Podcasts. Today's story was a reminder of how important it is to learn from the past, to see where things went wrong, and to understand the power of respect and unity.
Yes, absolutely. Remember, our goal is to build a future that values kindness over fear. If there's someone else in history you'd like us to cover, let us know. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast.
See you next time.